After the first season introduced us to the Gallagher family and their unique personalities, Season 2 dives deeper into each character's personal growth. Welcome back to Shameless, the show about family, but definitely not one for family viewing. As always, dinner at the Gallagher house is anything but normal. Sheila, who once feared even stepping outside, has finally made it to the front yard. At this rate, she'll be back to her old routines in no time. Meanwhile, her daughter Karen has started seeing someone new. Someone who looks like a young Keanu Reeves with a mysterious and brooding vibe. And of course, Frank is still living with them, which is great for his real family, at least until he gets himself into trouble at the bar. Frank, being Frank, can't resist running his mouth when he overhears a guy bragging about taking 2 taser shots and still holding his own against 3 cops. Thinking he could make a quick buck, Frank bets the guy $10,000 that he can't handle another round. With no money to back up his reckless wager, Frank starts scrambling to find cash. He ransacks Sheila's house for anything valuable, watches, credit cards, but Karen has already hidden them. Left with no choice, he heads home and borrows Liam, along with a sign, to try his luck at begging on the streets. Unfortunately, Frank crosses paths with the same guy from the bar, who isn't thrilled about the unpaid bet. Frank and Liam are hauled off to a warehouse, where the man demands his money. Unable to pay up, Frank is forced to leave his youngest son behind as collateral and heads back home to figure out a way to get the cash. His first bright idea, mixing up a homemade magic potion, using the kid's medicine and selling it to partygoers. But business is rough, cops chase him out of the main streets, and gangsters claim the alleyways. With no other options left, Frank does what he does best, compromises his morals. He heads to a gay bar, hoping to make some quick cash in ways he'd rather not discuss. Even so, $10,000 in one night is a long shot, and the Gallaghers are bound to notice Liam's absence sooner or later. Meanwhile, the rest of the family is wrapped up in their own lives. During summer break, Fiona has picked up a job as a waitress at a nightclub, working alongside her neighbor, Veronica. That night, Jasmine, a new friend Fiona met at the end of last season, introduces her to a rich older man, her sugar daddy, and invites Fiona to join their luxurious escapades. After work, the group rides around in a flashy convertible before stopping by the river for some recreational fun. Fiona meets Adam, a handsome stranger, and the two share a moment running along the shore at sunrise. It reminds Fiona of her old track days, how she almost made it to nationals before life threw her off course. By the time she gets home, Adam drops her off, and she slips back into her real life, making breakfast for her siblings before heading to bed. The next morning, Lip stumbles into the kitchen sporting a black eye. Last night, he and Ian tried making extra cash at an underground fight club. Being someone's punching bag pays better than tutoring over the summer. When not getting beaten up, Lip has teamed up with Kevin for a side hustle selling smuggled convenience store goods from an old van. Their most profitable item, papaya leaves. Kevin has an entire grow operation in his basement under the bar where he works. The only downside, the electricity bill has skyrocketed. To unload their stock quickly, Lip and Kevin hit the streets, selling everything from spicy snacks to knock-off energy drinks. Kevin even places a bet on England for the Euro Cup, hoping for a miracle win. To stay ahead of law enforcement, Lip builds a makeshift police detector, a device that beeps whenever cops are nearby, giving them time to bail. On the relationship front, Lip is still involved with Karen, though to him it's mostly physical Karen, however, has set her sights on someone else. Jody, a guy in his 30s. According to her, they spend nights together just listening to music. Sure, nothing suspicious about that. One day, Lip snoops through Ian's bag and finds something alarming. Ian is considering joining the military instead of going to college. Instead of taking the easy route, Ian wants to serve and make a difference. But to enlist, he needs a 4.2 GPA, which means Lip, as the resident genius, takes it upon himself to tutor his brother into qualifying. Ian is still working at the convenience store run by a Muslim couple. The wife handles everything while the husband, well, sneaks around with other men, and just when his wife needs him the most, right before she gives birth, he decides to walk out on the family. Later that night, when the Gallagher siblings return home, they realize something's wrong. Liam is missing, and Frank is nowhere to be found. They track him down at Sheila's house, only to find him sleeping soundly, completely unbothered. Furious, they storm off to the thug's warehouse to negotiate Liam's release, scraping together whatever cash they can. They don't have the full $10,000 yet, but knowing the Gallaghers, they'll find a way to pay. The next morning, Veronica gathers the family to help unload her stash of illicit herbs before the cops catch on. Each sibling gets a small package to sell, while the rest gets buried in the backyard. Somewhere between the tomatoes, the rest set on fire for the whole block to enjoy. Meanwhile, Sheila is making major strides. Today, she makes it all the way to the grocery store. Among the fresh produce, she picks out an eggplant, big, long, and just the right size. And no, we're not getting a scene of what happens next, because Shameless doesn't have a Vaseline sponsorship. Frank's biggest concern isn't Sheila's eccentric habits, though he's terrified that once she becomes fully independent, she'll have no use for him and kick him out. At the bar, he learns about Dottie, a neighborhood woman who's on the brink of death, waiting for a heart transplant. To Frank, that means one thing: inheritance money. Wasting no time, he shows up at her doorstep with a plate of spaghetti and a charming smile, hoping to worm his way into her good graces. Dottie wears a device that beeps when a donor heart is available, but Frank can't tell the difference between that sound and a YouTube like button notification. To buy himself time, he fixes things around her house, and his efforts pay off. Dottie lets him use her bathroom's small wins. Meanwhile, Ian reunites with Mickey, his former flame, who's fresh out of juvie. Their dynamic is complicated. Ian is disciplined and goal-oriented, while Mickey is reckless and violent. Yet somehow, they click. Mickey even joins Ian at work, giving them more time together. Over at the bar, Kevin's van-turned-pop-up shop expands its customer base, selling treats to both partygoers and senior citizens. Veronica, who juggles more responsibilities than Fiona, splits her time between bartending and running activities at a retirement home. Today, she takes the seniors on a field trip, but instead of an exciting adventure, they make dull stops at pharmacies and convenience stores. One resident, Harry, asks to be dropped off at the park, hoping to touch real grass again. Sadly, he collapses shortly after. The news of Harry's passing reminds the elderly residents to live life to the fullest. Meanwhile, Karen has officially chosen Jody, introducing him to her mom, while Lip is left outside, smoking and contemplating life. As for Fiona, love has been the last thing on her mind since Steve left, but tonight she has an unexpected date with a man who fits a particular sugar daddy profile. Remember Jasmine, the one who took advantage of her sugar daddy while her husband was away? Well, she's back at it again, setting Fiona up with one of her sugar daddy's rich friends, Richard. Richard is in his 40s, wealthy, well-dressed, but still single. He's not exactly excited about meeting Fiona, though. He's only doing it to impress his business associates. Surprisingly, his blunt honesty makes it easier for the two to talk. Despite the pleasant conversation, nothing happens between them that night. The next day, Fiona goes all out, dressing to impress for another date, this time with Craig Heisner, her high school crush. At first, it was just a joke. Jasmine had taken Fiona's phone and sent Craig a message on a whim. But when Craig actually responded, things got interesting. The only issue: he's married. They meet at a coffee shop, starting with casual small talk. One step leads to another, and soon their conversation starts feeling more like an actual date than a simple reunion. It seems like a lucky day for Fiona. She reconnects with an old flame and manages to snag a lost purse on the subway, inside over $500 in cash. Instead of pocketing all the money, she treats her siblings to a buffet meal, easing her conscience, but feeling a twinge of guilt. She also calls the purse's owner, hoping to return it and maybe even receive a small reward. The next morning, Fiona knocks on the door of the purse's rightful owner, expecting to meet some wealthy socialite. Instead, she's greeted by a struggling single mother barely making ends meet. Feeling sympathy for the woman's situation, Fiona decides to return the full amount. She even dips into the family's emergency fund to help out. But instead of gratitude, she gets an earful. The woman immediately assumes Fiona stole the money in the first place and lashes out. Furious, Fiona fires back before storming off with the cash, no longer feeling so charitable. Frustrated and fed up, she finds comfort in Craig again. This time, things go all the way. However, the experience is far from the passionate fantasy she might have imagined. Craig's performance is underwhelming, clumsy, and to top it off, he spills food all over Fiona's legs. Disappointed and irritated, she later calls Steve, her ex, just to hear his voice. She doesn't say much, just enough to listen for a few seconds. But Steve, now in Brazil, isn't exactly in a position to offer her comfort. Meanwhile, Lip is making moves of his own. After supplying his professor with premium goods and crafting custom alphabet charts to win over the man's students, he secures a meeting with Colonel McNally. Lip wants to introduce Ian to the colonel in hopes of getting him into the military. But there's a catch. The colonel wants Lip to collaborate on an electronics project first. Of course, Lip's talents extend beyond just schoolwork. Alongside his homemade police detector, he's developed another questionable invention, an electronic device that can read customers' credit card details remotely. Always the entrepreneur, Lip finds ways to profit from his skills, even if they're a little shady. Later that night, he meets up with Karen for their usual rendezvous, but this time, she stops him. She has a feeling Jody is about to propose, and for once, she wants to think about her future. Sure enough, the next evening at a bar, Jody pulls out a ring and asks Karen to marry him. The ring isn't just any ring, it's the one Frank had previously stolen, but why would Frank return something valuable instead of selling it? Because even the king of scams can sometimes be weak for love. The day before, Jody had visited Frank, excitedly sharing his proposal plans. In a moment of distraction, Frank swiped the ring right off him, but instead of selling it for quick cash, Frank decided to use it for his own romantic gamble, with Dottie. Dottie may not have much time left, but Frank sees her as a golden ticket. Her life insurance and pension benefits are worth a fortune to him, so he makes a grand declaration of love, promising to keep her memory alive. He even suggests naming a drink after her at Kevin's bar, ensuring that every time someone orders it, they'll toast to Dottie Coronis. That same day, the hospital calls. There's finally a donor heart available for her transplant. But Frank, already invested in his scheme, convinces her to pass on the surgery. Later, when Dottie hears on the news that the donor heart was given to someone else, reality sinks in. With her condition, waiting another year for another match is impossible. She knows she won't make it. Dottie pleads with Frank for one final request. She wants to go out on her own terms, doing what she does best, making love. She knows Frank isn't serious about her, but she plays along. Before she passes, she arranges for her house to go to a national women's organization and leaves her savings to her daughter. But as a consolation prize, she leaves Frank with $2,000 for his love and companionship during her last weeks. Feeling victorious, Frank cranks up the charm one last time before Dottie passes. It might just be the most effort he's ever put into anything. Later, he removes the engagement ring from her hand and returns it to Jody, in some twisted way giving his blessing to Karen's new relationship. That night, Frank wanders into a candlelit church, saying a prayer for Dottie's soul. But he also notices the donation box, which is just too tempting to leave untouched. While all this unfolds, Debbie is grappling with deep thoughts about death. After witnessing Mr. Harry pass away at the nursing home, she starts questioning life, mortality, and even why people defecate when they die. Her body and mind are changing, and in a chaotic household like the Gallaghers, she has to figure things out on her own. Then, an unexpected guest arrives, a woman carrying a baby, asking for Fiona. Debbie, assuming she's another desperate mother looking for childcare, rushes to wake Fiona. But when Fiona comes downstairs, she's met with a slap across the face. Turns out, this woman is Craig's wife, and she's just found out about his little affair. A chaotic chase ensues, with Fiona running through the streets until she finally escapes at Sheila's house. When Frank sees his daughter being hunted down by a furious wife, he finds it hilarious. He never imagined Fiona would end up in a scandal just like him. In his mind, the real drama is yet to come, when the wife turns on her husband, and if Fiona plays her cards right, she might even get one last round in before it's over. Karen is dead serious about marrying Jody, turning down Lip's advances. Lip, seeing no way to win her back, shifts gears. He decides to dig up dirt on Jody. Jody seems too good to be true. Tall, good-looking, and packing impressive attributes. He doesn't even have a job, but with his father's inheritance, he doesn't really need one. Lip enlists Kevin's help to snoop through Jody's wallet, but shockingly, there's nothing suspicious. Even Officer Tony can't find a record on him, aside from a minor parking ticket. Meanwhile, the Gallaghers prepare for Debbie's sleepover party. Fiona encourages her to invite some cool kids, so Debbie approaches Simon, an awkward nerd, and Holly, a rebellious older girl. Fiona gets called into work at the last minute, leaving Lip and Ian in charge of the party, but things quickly spiral. Holly sneaks upstairs and tries to seduce Lip, who immediately shuts her down. Meanwhile, Ian tries to set a trap for Jody by using Mandy to seduce him. But Jody, being ridiculously faithful, not only rejects Mandy, but also tells Karen everything. The next morning, Karen storms over to Lip, kicks him to the curb, and drops a bombshell. She's pregnant. Frank, ever the opportunist, tries to avoid facing reality by sleeping in, but Sheila isn't having it. One swift kick sends him straight out of bed and into a world he desperately wants to escape. Even as he grits his teeth and cleans her drains, he knows he won't be able to stop her from stepping outside forever. But just when it seems like nothing can hold Sheila back, fate intervenes in the most absurd way. A plane wheel crashes down right in front of her. If there was ever a cosmic sign meant just for Sheila, this was it. Every fear she thought she had overcome comes rushing back 1,000-fold. Meanwhile, the show reminds us of something that had long been buried. This family once had a patriarch today. Police pull Jackson's body from Lake Michigan. The news shakes Sheila to her core, leaving her in a fragile state. Frank, however, sees an opportunity. Stepping up in a rare moment of so-called responsibility, he offers to handle Jackson's paperwork, including his pension and insurance. But trouble is brewing. Authorities suspect foul play in Jackson's death, and it doesn't help that half the people at the bar know Jackson had once threatened Frank. The problem. Even if Frank is innocent in this case, any police investigation into his life would unravel an entire web of past misdeeds. He needs an airtight alibi. He turns to his kids, hoping to convince them to lie for him. Unsurprisingly, they refuse. Ian, however, suggests Frank seek help from Mandy's father, Terry, a man who has made dodging law enforcement an art form. Terry advises Frank against using a weak alibi like camping alone. No one is going to take the word of a deer in court. Instead, he tells Frank to make himself memorable. Head to a gun show, buy a crossbow, chat up the vendor, and create a solid paper trail. And, if needed, grease a few palms to edit security footage, the price tag for Terry's foolproof plan. $1,900. But before Frank can even think about raising the money, cops pick him up, not for Jackson's case, but for a long-forgotten crime from Season 1, the infamous carrot incident with Karen has come back to haunt him, now reclassified as a case of child endangerment. If convicted, Frank could be looking at a 30-year sentence. Before things spiral completely out of control, Karen steps in. Despite her complicated relationship with Frank, she takes the blame and clears him of any wrongdoing. Frank walks free, and when he gets home, he's met with something even rarer than freedom, Sheila's sympathy. Meanwhile, Fiona's brief encounter with Richard takes an unexpected turn. He invites her to a high-society wedding, and she agrees. Wanting to appear more refined, she has him pick her up at Adam's place, the guy she met on the beach. Adam is conveniently out of town, making the ruse easy to maintain. The moment Richard arrives, he gifts her a dazzling necklace, and the two head off to a lavish mansion for the wedding. Fiona, for all her street smarts, navigates conversations with the elite surprisingly well, until a seasoned businessman calls her bluff. He sees right through her flimsy, prestigious university story, and, rather than exposing her, offers her a proposition for a different kind of deal. Before she has to answer, Richard intervenes, escorting her out of the uncomfortable situation. On the drive home, he makes it clear. He knew she wasn't Ivy League material from the start. He just wanted to see how long she could keep up the act. Before parting ways, Richard offers to let her keep the necklace, but Fiona declines. She knows she'd end up pawning it anyway. For a moment, it seems like this unconventional pairing might have potential. That is, until Fiona steps out of the car and spots a familiar face from next door. Steve. Just like that, whatever had been budding between her and Richard is eclipsed by the rush of old feelings. While Fiona's love life is a mess, Kevin and Veronica's relationship remains as strong as ever, until Veronica stumbles upon a handwritten letter in their house. The problem: Kevin can't read, which means someone else must have written it. Her mind immediately jumps to the worst-case scenario. Kevin is cheating, and when Malik, a neighborhood kid, tells her there wasn't a game the night Kevin supposedly went to watch, she knows something's up. She follows Kevin, determined to catch him in the act, but instead of finding another woman, she sees him meeting with an older white woman. When Kevin returns home, Veronica is ready for war. Tying him to a chair, she pulls out a massive pair of garden shears. Kevin, convinced his time has come, blurts out the truth. The woman is his tutor. He's been secretly learning to read. Veronica, realizing her mistake, tracks down the tutor to confirm the story. She's ready to throw hands. But when she sees that the woman really is a teacher, she sheepishly backs off. To make it up to Kevin, she helps him study in a way that only she can, by covering her body in flashcards. If Kevin can successfully read a word, he gets to remove the card and see what's underneath. Meanwhile, Lip is dealing with his own revelations. Karen is pregnant, but she wants nothing from him. In fact, she's doing everything in her power to push him away while preparing to marry Jody. Given the timeline, Lip has the highest odds of being the father, Statistically speaking, out of 7 days, he was in the mix for at least 6.5. As if that weren't enough, Colonel McNally shows up at the Gallagher house, but instead of recruiting Ian, he wants Lip for West Point. The news creates immediate tension between the brothers. Ian feels like Lip is stealing his opportunity, while Lip thinks Ian is being ridiculous. After all, Lip was the one who put in the work, tutoring him and networking with the colonel. The argument escalates, and in the heat of the moment, Ian throws out a brutal remark. Maybe Lip should get a paternity test for Karen's baby, because there's a chance he's not just its brother, but its father. Across town, an unexpected face reappears. Frank's estranged mother, Peggy, fresh out of prison for drug charges. She wastes no time digging up her old stash, which has been hidden near the Gallagher toilet for years. The treasure trove contains a stack of cash, a gun, and, disturbingly, a severed finger in a jar. Peggy's next move. Visiting an old business associate, Dr. Noah Peets. Years ago, the two had cooked meth together until a tragic explosion landed her in prison, while Noah walked away free. Now, Peggy wants what she's owed, $200,000. When Noah refuses, Peggy pays a visit to his family to apply some pressure, but before she can go full mobster, she nearly passes out from a sudden spike in blood pressure. She reluctantly sends Frank to pick up her medication, but Frank, always scheming, returns to Noah and sweet-talks him into handing over $75,000. When Frank smugly presents Peggy with only $50,000, assuming she won't notice, she immediately calls his bluff, the punishment, a screwdriver to the thigh. Frank, realizing there's no outsmarting his mother, hands over the rest of the money. Meanwhile, Steve has resurfaced with shocking news. He's married. His Brazilian wife's father is a crime boss, and Steve had no choice but to marry her for her legal residency, but none of that matters to Fiona. As soon as they're alone, she falls right back into old habits. Unsurprisingly, their secret rendezvous doesn't go unnoticed. Adam, who had been genuinely interested in Fiona, realizes what's going on and walks away, leaving her with no regrets. The day of Karen's wedding arrives Sheila, overcoming her fears once more, takes a shot of liquid courage before making a grand entrance to give her daughter a heartfelt blessing. But the happy occasion is soon disrupted. Frank's mother and Sheila, two forces of chaos, come head to head. And when words fail, Peggy pulls out a gun. Steve barely manages to intervene before things turn deadly, but the damage is done. Moments later, the police arrive. Frank, eager to be rid of his mother, tips them off, but Tony, the cop with a soft spot for the Gallaghers, halts the arrest. Peggy may be a criminal, but she's their criminal. Lip, ever the problem solver, offers Karen a way out. He knows a shady notary who for a few $100 will alter the date on her prenuptial agreement. All she has to do is get Jody to sign it, and she'll walk away with half his assets. But Karen can't even make it to the next evening before her patience runs out. She throws all of Jody's clothes onto the front lawn. Sensing an opportunity, Lip makes his move. He offers Karen comfort, and soon enough, he's back in her bed. The rush of adrenaline doesn't stop him from settling a score with Ian, though the brothers decide to hash out their frustrations the only way they know how, a full-on fistfight. According to old-school rules, two men punching each other is the quickest way to settle a dispute, and surprisingly, it works. Meanwhile, Fiona's love life is a mess. Between Craig, Adam, and Steve, she's stuck in a whirlwind of unresolved feelings. Jasmine, ever the bad influence, invites Fiona onto a yacht owned by her sugar daddy. Worth noting, Jasmine has a husband and kids at home, but still finds time for affairs with rich men. After wrapping up her responsibilities at home, Fiona heads to the boat, bringing Veronica and Kevin along for the ride. What she doesn't expect, running into Steve and his wife, Estefania. The night unfolds with plenty of booze and hot tub antics. By the time Kevin is on his third Long Island iced tea, he starts ranting about Veronica's lack of attention. But while their relationship woes take center stage, Fiona finds herself cornered by Steve. She tries to put up a front, insisting she won't be involved with a married man, but deep down, the feelings are still there. Things get even messier when Jasmine, perhaps feeling bold or just drunk, leans in and kisses Fiona. The next morning, Jasmine shows up at the Gallagher house, apologizing for the kiss, but also asking for a place to stay. Her sugar daddy kicked her out, and now she's temporarily homeless. Despite offering to pay rent, Fiona refuses. She has enough chaos to deal with. Jasmine doesn't take rejection well. She lashes out, calling Fiona ungrateful. Sure, she's introduced Fiona to new job opportunities, nicer clothes, and connections, But when she brings up Steve, that's when things get ugly. Just as they're in the middle of a heated argument, who walks up Steve talk about bad timing. Elsewhere, Kevin finds himself involved in an unexpected side project. Babysitting Stan, the senile owner of Alibi's bar, Stan's daughter, wants to throw him into a nursing home and sell the bar, but Kevin isn't about to let that happen. At one point, Stan nearly floods the place after dozing off in the bathroom with the sink running. Veronica steps in and helps Kevin relocate him to her retirement home, conveniently filling a vacancy left by a recently deceased resident. According to the law of the elderly, old people don't disappear. They just get transferred from one place to another. Meanwhile, Peggy has found a temporary resting place at Sheila's house. Watching the once ferocious woman now struggling with illness is a stark contrast to the version of her that nearly put a bullet in Sheila's head the day before. Frank, out running errands for his ailing mother, stumbles upon Ian and Mickey in a compromising position. Instead of making a scene, Frank barely reacts. After all, he's done worse for money in his younger days. Mickey, on the other hand, does react. Panicked that his secret is at risk, he rounds up his goons, grabs a few weapons, and goes on a manhunt for Frank. Ian, realizing what's about to go down, rushes to warn his father, only to find Frank too preoccupied with his mother's declining health to care. Later, Frank takes a trip down memory lane at the bar, reminiscing about his childhood. His mother had a Sunday tradition, making him mix her Bloody Marys, and if he got the proportions wrong, a punch to the face. If he flinched or cried, another punch. Frank's nostalgia is cut short when Mickey's crew storms in, searching for him. Thinking on his feet, Kevin sends them on a wild goose chase to a different bar across town. As the sun sets, Frank makes his way home, dodging Mickey and his crew, who are now making their presence known at every pub in town. Mickey, realizing he can't kill Frank, instead gets himself arrested. Anything is better than going home and facing his father. Meanwhile, Peggy, aware that her time is running out, makes her final arrangements. She splits the last of her money among her sons, except for Frank. The next morning, while having Jody mail off the envelopes, Peggy wheels herself into the street, hoping for an accident to speed up the process. Unfortunately, modern car brakes work too well. Plan B: suffocation. Sheila is asked to assist, but when it doesn't work, they try again, this time with a pillow. While all of this unfolds, Lip is on a mission of his own. He and Karen begin searching for adoptive parents for the baby, preferably wealthy ones willing to pay them for the privilege of raising her child. But when Lip learns he has no say in keeping the baby, his emotions spiral. Distracted in class, he snaps at a teacher and gets expelled. Later, the same teacher visits Fiona, insisting that Lip is too smart to throw his future away. Fiona doesn't hold back. She rips into Lip, telling him he has two choices: go back to school or start shoveling literal shit. Lip, stubborn as always, packs his bags and walks out. While Lip is busy self-destructing, Fiona has been slowly building herself back up. She's even studying to get her GED. But just as it seems like things are settling down, a familiar face reappears. Monica. Monica's return is anything but a joyful reunion. Behind her forced smile is a ticking time bomb. Fiona, skeptical of her mother's intentions, reaches out to Bob, Monica's last girlfriend, for answers. Turns out, even she couldn't handle Monica's instability. Frank, oddly enough, is the one who drags Monica back home. Maybe it's grief over his mother's death, or maybe he just misses the chaos, but he convinces her to stay. Lip, meanwhile, quickly realizes independence isn't all it's cracked up to be. He bounces from Karen's house, where Sheila demands he pay rent, to Kevin's bar, where he's not welcome, before finally turning to his professor for help. But without a diploma, there's no future for him in academia. Desperate, he turns to Steve, offering to help him win Fiona back in exchange for a place to stay. In the process, he uncovers a secret. Steve's wife is cheating on him. Karen, growing increasingly distant from Jody, seeks out Lip one last time, but Lip isn't the only one competing for her attention. Turns out, a married man named Ron has been involved with her as well. While Lip struggles to find his place, Ian and Mandy hatch a plan to frame Mandy's father, Terry, by planting a gun in his house and tipping off the cops. But before they can escape, Terry catches them. Mandy makes a last-minute confession. She was never actually pregnant. Ian, relieved, but still protective, promises to help her however he can. Elsewhere, Steve hatches his own escape plan. By handing over his identity to Marco, Estefania's real boyfriend, he secures a way out of his sham marriage. But just as he's breaking free, the Gallagher household is thrown into chaos. Monica has stolen all of their savings. In a haze of reckless indulgence, Monica squanders everything on drugs, a car, and a joyride with little Liam behind the wheel. When Fiona finds out, the betrayal cuts deeper than any previous abandonment. Just as the family had begun to hope for stability, Monica reminds them why she was never fit to be a mother. The season culminates with a tragic Thanksgiving. Just as the family sits down to eat, Monica attempts suicide. Fiona, numb with exhaustion, cleans up the blood while Steve comforts her. Upstairs, Karen gives birth, but the baby isn't white or black, it's Asian. As the adoptive parents back out, Sheila makes a last-minute decision. She will raise the baby herself. That night, Fiona, drained beyond words, collapses into Steve's arms. And for now, that's enough.